They need to go a lot higher because what they've done so far is completely inadequate. Powell keeps saying we have restrictive monetary policy. Gold is telling you we have loose monetary policy. And if you look at all the accumulation of debt, you don't have all this debt with tight money. All this debt is being accumulated because money is still too easy.
So, Peter, what about the other side of that, though? Like in a deflationary death spiral, as they call it, like in Japan or what's happening in China right now, like the arguments that if prices start going down, businesses have to lower their prices and they start laying people off. And that's a whole difficult situation to get themselves out of, like what we saw in Japan after the bubble, what we are seeing in China right now. So what about like inflation versus deflation?
Well, I mean, first of all, Japan is not having that. Japan has inflation. I mean, even the way they reported it's in
they forced it, kind of. You know, that
they kept, yes. But the idea that deflation is bad is nonsense. I mean, if you look at the CPI in the U.S. In 1800,
right,
and then look at it in 1900, prices were down 50% over 100 years. So that's 100 years of deflation. Yet we had the Industrial Revolution, the most prosperous period of time in America as far as economic growth was actually between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the First World War. So during that period, we've never seen a period since where we had more economic growth than we did then. And so that was with falling prices. There's nothing wrong with prices coming down because every businessman, if I'm a businessman, I want to lower my prices because I'll sell more stuff. So I'm always trying to figure out how can I cut my prices? How can I be more efficient? How can I wring some costs out of this manufacturing process so that I can lower my prices and make more money? Because you do greater volume at a lower price. And as long as my margins can stay the same or improve, then everybody wins from lower prices. Now, sure, I'd like to just jack my prices up, but I have competition, so I can't do that. So how do I get people to buy from me instead of my competitor? By lowering my price, not by raising my price. So I have to become more efficient to do that. So capitalism is an engine for falling prices, and that is good. The consumer wins. So this is all a bunch of nonsense that we need rising prices, and that somehow if prices go down, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, think about that right now. Prices have gone up so much in the last 2 or 3 years. Wouldn't it be good if they went down?
Yeah.
But the Fed is not talking about prices going down. They just want prices to rise more slowly. But that means they still go up. So if prices are too high right now, why do I want them to go up? Right. I mean, I want them to come down. But that's totally off the table because what the government is really trying to do is inflate. Because inflation is a benefit to debtors, right? Inflation transfers wealth from creditors to debtors, right? Because you inflate away the value of the obligations. The world's biggest debtor, I mean, maybe the universe's biggest debtor. I don't know if there's if there's life on another planet. I doubt there's any entity that has more debt than the United States on that planet. But so the U.S. government owes more than anybody.
Yeah.
So it has more to gain from inflation than anybody. It constantly pursues inflation as a policy.
So isn't that like a built-in thing, though, with the reserve currency that you have to be at a deficit so that you could supply the rest of the world with your currency?
No, because we were the reserve currency in the 1960s, 1970s, most of the 1980s, and we had trade surpluses during those years. So we don't have to.
Have you ever heard of Trins Dilemma?
What's that?
Trins Dilemma. So it's the argument that like we're serving two purposes at once, where we're trying to give the rest of the world enough money to like for the world economy to function because it needs dollars.
They don't really. I mean, they don't really need dollars. What's a dollar? It's just a piece of paper.
Well, it's what the rest of the world uses for everything.
Well, they're going to stop doing that. But ultimately, you have to realize that those dollars represent IOUs. That ultimately those dollars are spendable in America. And, you know, we basically get everything repossessed. I mean, we have been exporting our inflation. We're now the world's biggest debtor nation. As late as the 1980s, we were the world's biggest creditor nation. And we've dissipated that wealth. And now we're in hock up to our eyeballs. But the reality is we can't make good these IOUs because we don't have the productive capacity anymore. We don't have the factories. They used to be here, but because the dollar's been the reserve currency and we've been able to rely on that, we've been able to buy stuff that's manufactured in China as opposed to having to manufacture it ourselves. And it's a lot easier to print money than manufacture goods. And so we outsourced all that manufacturing to China, but what did we give them for their goods? We just gave them pieces of paper. But at the end of the day, when they want to buy something with that paper, there's nothing to buy except our financial assets. They can buy our real estate, they can buy our stocks. But then, that just prices go up and inflation, runs rampant because right now that money is just sitting in treasuries or something like that. But if the Chinese spend it and they go and they buy a house or they, buy stock, they pay the American those dollars go back into our economy, bidding up prices. And so we exported our inflation for all these years. It's gonna come back like a tsunami.
Well, but that's part of the reason, though. So, if you're a Chinese citizen, obviously it's a safer bet to invest in America rather than investing in Chinese real estate where they've overbuilt by the size of the population. There's that many empty houses, or you can't trust the stock market. It's hard to even get your money out of the country. So, I guess that's the argument for why you want to be outside of China and in the dollar, and it makes it. I mean, isn't the dollar sort of oxygen to the world economy?
No, I think it's more toxic. I mean, I think, the world has gotten addicted to this system and they're weaning themselves off of it. But I think it's a major mistake. I think one of the reasons there's these global economic imbalances is because of the dollar being the reserve currency. We've basically, what's the word I'm looking for? But we've exploited or, we've taken advantage of that position that we were in. And we've run these huge deficits and allowed our economy to, really, change and restructure away from manufacturing to just services. And that is unsustainable because we can't pay for our imported goods with our services. We need real goods that we can export. I mean, some services you can provide and export, but clearly not enough. You need to make real stuff. And we can't do that. And we now owe so much money to so many countries. I mean, we're in debt to every country. And, the countries that we owe money to are a lot poorer in most of the cases than we are, right? So, I mean, we owe a lot of money to people. And we can't pay. All we could do is go deeper and deeper into debt. And so the question is, how much longer can we borrow money when the lenders know we can't pay? And I've talked to people who say, well, we don't even have to pay the money back. And I would say, well, do our lenders know that? I mean, how is it a loan if we don't have to pay it back? I mean, we run the national debt the way Bernie Madoff ran his business. That's why I used to joke that instead of putting him in jail, we should have made him Secretary of the Treasury, because he has a lot of experience in running a Ponzi scheme, because that's what we're doing, right? Every time they have one of these treasury bond auctions, and there's auctions all the time now, why are we doing that? We're holding auctions so that we can repay the maturing debt. Right? We don't have the money to repay the people who loaned it to us. We have to find new borrowers to lend it to us so we can pay them. And if we can't go deeper into debt, then we can't pay off. That's why whenever we get to the debt ceiling, they always say, well, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we're going to default. That's an admission that it's a Ponzi scheme. They don't say, well, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we'll raise taxes, we'll cut spending, we'll find a way to pay legitimately. They say, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, we're not going to pay back any of the people who loaned us money. And it's ironic because they keep saying America always pays its bills, so we have to raise the debt ceiling. No, we have to raise the debt ceiling because we never paid our bills. If we paid our bills, we wouldn't have any debt. The reality is, in order to keep not paying our bills, we have to raise the debt ceiling. And of course, we will keep raising the debt ceiling. That's not the key. The key is, when do the foreigners, right, refuse to raise the lending ceiling? When do they say, we're not lending you any more money? And I think that's coming soon at the way the cost, right now, it's about $1 trillion a year to pay the interest on the national debt. Forget about the $35 trillion in principal. It's $1 trillion a year in interest. So interest expenses are the third biggest line item. It passed the fence. In another couple of years, it'll be number one. It'll be bigger than Social Security or Medicare.
Passing entitlements.
Yeah, and a few years after that, interest will consume 100% of government tax revenue, which means all of our taxes will go to just paying interest on the debt. not paying down the principal, just the interest.
Assuming they keep
and
the
they'll
rates
same. Or they go up, which they should.
Well, the crazy thing,
and there's no money for anything else. The government is just a conduit to take money from the taxpayers and pay our credit. So obviously it can't get there. And the lenders know that it can't get there. They got to stop lending. That's what they're doing. That's why they're buying gold right now. They can read the writing on the wall. I mean, they wrote it. And they don't want to wait for that moment. They want to preempt it. They're getting quietly out of dollars, and they're buying as much gold as they can.
Well, why is there still massive demand, though, at all the Treasury auctions? Because we've never had a problem selling Treasuries. And some would argue that, well, I mean, Treasuries are the preferred collateral in the world, and they're collateral for pretty much any serious financial transaction.
There is, and then the argument is, we're the cleanest dirty shirt in the hamper, which I don't buy. I mean, I think there's
Who's cleaner?
I think they're all dirty. That's true. But I think that there are a lot of governments that have better financial positions than the United States. And so, you could buy their bonds. But they say, oh, the market is not as liquid. It's not as big. Yeah, because we have so much debt. But I don't know what the, aha, emperor has no clothes moment will be. But look, it always happens, right? I mean, I remember, the subprime trade when we were short the market. And when subprime started to blow up and a couple of big lenders failed, I had expected the bonds to collapse, but they didn't. They stayed above par. And, because people still hadn't figured it out. But when it collapsed, it only took a few days, and then they went to zero. And, I live in Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico went through a debt crisis where it basically defaulted. But for years and years and years, Puerto Rico was borrowing all this money. And it should have been obvious that they could never pay it back, but they didn't care. All these funds wanted to load up on Puerto Rican bonds. They were triple tax-free. They were tax-free in the U.S. They were tax-free in all the states. So all these bond funds wanted to put these Puerto Rican bonds in their portfolios, and they didn't really care that Puerto Rico, obviously, just doing the math, had no way of paying it back. But they kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing until all of a sudden people cared, and then it was a crisis. Same thing happened in like Greece. I mean, you can get away with it until you can't. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is going to happen with the United States, just taking longer. But we're going to be able to refinance the debt until we can't. Yeah. And when we can't, then it's a crisis. Right? Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh, we have time to fix it. If you wait for the market to do it, it's too late, right?
Yeah.
So we should already be looking forward to that and drastically cutting spending, raising taxes, doing something to, correct this imbalance. But no, we're going to wait until the market causes a crisis.